There's a very real reality at the CrossFit Games for Dave Castro and his team this year, which is they did not have the same access to financial resources that they've had in previous years. I think he was concerned that I was going to do something rash. I can be emotional in moments. That's when I started thinking, oh my God, did he drown? We're lucky it was only one person that died that day.
Yeah.
You know, when you know a lot more about a topic than the majority of the people who are interested in the topic, you have to be somewhat selective about how and when you share those things.
A wonderful good morning, fellow CrossFit enthusiasts, and welcome to the 11th episode of the second season of Good Morning Murph, your CrossFit podcast made with love in Austria. And today, I know I say this every time, but today really is a very, very special episode. I do have two guests by my side, and we're going to start by introducing them. And of course, we're going to go ladies first. To my left, we have 2 times fittest female masters athlete in Austria, co-founder of Badass Mentality Coaching, and soon to be Vodapalooza Teams athlete, Shireen Maria Savari. Welcome to Good Morning Murph.
Oh, welcome. Thanks for having me.
And on the other side of the table, we do have flown in from Dubai, the best friend CrossFit could possibly have, at least in the recent years. And today we're going to find out, is that also going to be the case in the upcoming seasons? He is the founder of Be Friendly Fitness, and from the first 1 minute and 45 seconds of this podcast, I can tell that his name fits him very, very well. Brian, friend, what an honor to have you on the podcast, and welcome to Good Morning Murph.
Thank you. Yeah, first time in Vienna. Excited to be doing this.
Brian, first time in Vienna. What actually are you doing in Vienna?
Well, in addition to covering CrossFit or fitness competitions around the world, I enjoy when I'm able to kind of dovetail those experiences with getting to know the community. And when I do travel overseas, I really dislike doing it for one weekend or 4 days or something like that. So I try to string competitions back to back. And the best case scenario is if I'm also able to work myself into whatever capacity that looks like with the community in one of the countries that the competitions are in, or a nearby country or community. So last year on this exact same trip between Dubai and Fall Series Throwdown, I did this in Izmir, Turkey. And I went there. Seher Kaya came as well. We did some seminars at a gym there with a family who owns a couple gyms, and it was a great experience. This was a very organic and spontaneous thing that happened. You two were actually both in Oslo for Oslo Throwdown. I did this little exhibition with the competition director there. Shireen recorded it. Her and her teammates were laughing. I heard them laughing from the floor as I was like making up this standard for burpees to try to compete with Roger. She posted it. I saw it. It made me laugh. We just had a little exchange. She said, you should come to Vienna sometime. I'm involved with some gyms there in a competition. And the timing just worked out.
Mm-hmm. Did you actually win the against Roger?
I don't think so. I think he somersaulted across first by like half a rep or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you remember who won?
No, I don't remember. I think it was close though.
It was
close. It was close.
Thankfully, there were no judges. I will say this. It was the fastest 20 calories I've ever run.
Yeah.
Really?
And the fastest burpees, right?
It looked very fast. It saw them brilliant.
Very funky.
Obviously, we're going to do this episode in English. But actually, how good is your German?
I got no German.
No, not a single word.
I mean, I could. Guten Tag.
Hey, there you go. There you go.
Danke schön.
Yeah.
That's probably about it.
Yeah, nice. It's the most important ones also. I just said flown in from Dubai. You basically just came from Dubai, from the Dubai Fitness Championships 2024, correct?
Yeah, that's the 4th time that I've had the opportunity to work there. I worked there in 2019. I was in the truck, kind of co-producing the broadcast. In 2020, they didn't have a competition for obvious reasons. In 2021, I was invited but chose not to go. And then the last 3 years, I've been on the broadcast team doing color commentary the previous 2 years. And this year, I did the play-by-play.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just as a quick recap, I mean, we have Luca winning, which is like the perfect scenario. How was the competition? I heard that Mars Fiebig had to drop out. But still, how was it? Like, event number 1 is also very special every year. Have you been there?
I was there.
Yeah,
I was there. That was
just a quick recap from your side.
Yeah, this year, personally, I was a lot more involved in the preparation, organization, programming side of things alongside Saud Al-Shamsi, who's the competition director there. So I got to see a lot more behind the scenes. And it's, every competition, this is the case. There's so many details and factors that are, considered when preparing a competition. And then there's people who are critiquing the competition, good, bad, or otherwise, that don't really have the access to that information. So it's really unique to be able to see how a competition comes to be, whether it's the organization, the sites that the competition is ran at, the broadcast, the programming, and then hear how people who don't have all that information assess it. But to see everything in the behind the scenes also means that you see the challenges that have to be overcome to be able to make it happen. And this is true for competitions, big or small, all over the world. It's really difficult, and it takes a lot of work to pull those things off. And even if they've been running for a dozen years, like Dubai has, there's different challenges every year. This year, in addition to, all of that, of course, there was a big emotional toll in Dubai, because Lazar's favorite competition was Dubai. He'd competed there every year for the last 5 years. He's been on the podium twice. And I think his two biggest dreams in his career were probably to podium at the CrossFit Games and to win the Dubai Fitness Championship. And this year, probably the two athletes who are closest to him in the space, Karen Frey and Lazar Dukic, obviously, happened to win it. And I know that for both of them, for different reasons, but for very personal and emotional ones, that there was a lot more significance to winning it this year than there would have been at any other time. And for Karen, I mean, look, it's her third time she's won it. Only Annie Thorsdottir has ever won it 3 times previously. No one's done it 3 times in a row. So that's an incredible achievement for any athlete to win a major competition 3 years running, and to be able to do it, in his absence and in his honors. She's not a very outspoken person. She's just quiet, reserved, sweet.
Totally.
But I know how much that meant for her. And for Luca, it was like, I don't want to speak for him, but I would have to say it was probably, the best and worst feeling at the same time, to stand on that podium. So very special weekend for me personally, very special weekend for the athletes, and for Saud as well. Saud was I would venture to say, the relationship that Saud had with Lazar was the best relationship he had with any athlete outside of the UAE, where he's really close with the athletes there. And the 8th workout on December 8th, 4 months after August 8th, was one that was a programmed as a Lazar tribute workout, and it was very personal to Saud. So that was a workout that Lazar had sent him 18 to 20 months ago. And he didn't want to just use the morning chalk-up workout or use a workout from his success at the games that he's had. This was something that was very intimate between the two of him. It was a cornerstone of the programming that we then built around. And, the totality of all those things, just, it's difficult for me to personally quantify the variety of different reasons why this weekend was so special.
Yes. You mentioned Cara Frey. Shireen, do you remember Cara Frey was at the Austrian Throwdown?
Yes,
I believe.
I remember her.
2-3 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's 3 or 4 years
three
ago.
or 4 years, and she dominated.
She was so impressive. Watching her back then, it was just a goddess, right? Like, compared to the other girls competing, who were all very strong. I think Turi Helgadottir also competed this year.
True.
So they two have great battles, and it was just amazing to watch her back then even.
Yeah. You mentioned, or I mentioned, Maurice Fiebig. What happened? Maurice Fiebig lost the competition. He got second to, I think, Fabio Benito Celes 2 years ago. What happened to Maurice? He won everything beforehand, and all of a sudden he rubbed out?
Yeah, it was really a bummer. I mean, I was there in Belgrade Games. The top 4 athletes from Belgrade Games on the men's side also competed in Dubai, and the top couple of women as well, and Matilda Garnis and Elisa Fuliano. But Moritz looked so good in Belgrade. I spoke to him the week prior, and he said he was feeling even better coming into Dubai. He said he ate some food on the airplane, and it never sat well with him. He was getting food poisoning and feeling sick the couple of days prior to. He tried to give it a go on the first day of competition. In practice, he had done a 360-watt FTP. And he said, I have no idea how I even managed 320, and I thought I was going to throw up the entire time. So for the interest of his long-term health and fitness, as hard as it was for him, he believes he would have won that competition. I think that, assuming everything else would go normal, that he'd be on the podium at the very least. And when you know that, and it's a significant payday in addition to a cornerstone of any athlete of that caliber season, to have to, make that decision was really difficult for him. But I think he felt confident in the fact that in that moment, it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do have a post from the Dubai Fitness Championships here. It's the podium.
Which one?
This year's podium. And I believe, Shireen, you told me.
Yeah.
Maybe there is some story to that.
Yeah. So a bit of a controversy about the female side, like the second and the third place. So maybe you want to, tell us a little bit more, give us a little bit of an insight or your side of the story.
Yeah, it's horrible.
About Jamie Simmons and Matilda Garns. So that was a little bit of
there was some
fortunate circumstances.
Yeah, without going into too much detail, there was some confusion. It was extremely close between the two of them in the end. There was some confusion about the way that the final workout finished. There was several conversations that happened on the competition floor. And basically it was just a lapse in communication where they had prepared the script for Josie Astula, the MC, for the podium. And then they had, after that fact, adjusted the scores based on conversations and the ruling of the head judge and forgot to update him on it.
Oh.
So everyone was expecting Karen, Jamie, Matilda.
Yeah.
But between the end of the women's event and the time that he read that out, there was a time where it was Karen, Matilda, Jamie, and he just didn't get the update. And so it's very unfortunate. It's never, no competition wants that to happen, obviously. And so if you look at the pictures, when it's just the women on the podium, it's different than when they had the women and the men come back up there later. So eventually they did get it right per the decisions that were made by the head judge and the competition organizer. But yeah, pretty unfortunate the way that it unfolded.
Mm-hmm. But the prize payout is going to be the correct one now.
Yes.
Maybe one last question for Dubai. I've been there 22 and 23. I was one of the 7 spectators, probably. Can you maybe just elaborate, why does Dubai focus so much on the media side, but not at all on the spectator side?
I wish I had a great answer for that. What I would say, I'm not sure, but what I do know is if you do come there, you because there's so few fans, you can actually have a pretty cool experience and integrate with the athletes a bit. I have a friend who's actually from Germany, Pepe, maybe some people know as that. This is his 6th year coming there, and he's met all the athletes, had conversations with them, gotten shirts and things from them. He's one of the most well-traveled fans that I know. So if you can swing it financially and go there, you're going to have a unique and cool experience because you're definitely not going to have to wait in lines for autographs or things like that. But, it's like 50-50 when I talk to Saud. Sometimes it seems like he's really motivated to fill the stands. And other times, I think that he just understands that it is what it is. And it's going to be viewed by tens of thousands of people externally. And it's also streamed on Dubai Sport TV nationally. It's on their national TV program. And I don't know the numbers of people who watch on there. But you're looking at hundreds of thousands of views around the world, but 100 views in the stadium, right? So some competitions are just like that. And I think that it's, if he wants there to be more people in the stands, I feel like he would be more aggressive in terms of marketing and making that accessible for people locally. And the fact that generally hasn't happened makes me feel that, when push comes to shove, he understands what it's going to be. A lot of athletes continue to come back there and compete year after year. So I don't think that they're necessarily like, oh man, I wish the stadium was fuller, and that's a deterrent from competing. There's great prize money. There's no taxes in the UAE.
Totally.
So that's a big bonus.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of people that watch it online.
Mm-hmm. Well, Shireen, you've competed much more than I did. Is it a difference if the ranks are full, if there are a lot of people in the stadium? Does it make it different for an athlete competing?
Yeah, it does.
It does?
To a certain degree, because at least for like the few minutes you're stepping on the comp floor before 3, 2, 1 go, because you getting like a little the vibe and everything. And if there are lots of people, of course it does it's just a different feeling. But for me personally, it's soon the clock starts, I'm just focused. I'm not like aware of what's going on outside of what I'm focusing on and the work I have to do. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like if there is a good live stream, because my parents or my family, normally they are not, they can't go everywhere with me in every competition. And it's so cool when there is a live stream so they can just watch me. So, I mean, I would say I prefer a good live stream because more people have access to.
Yeah, definitely. It reaches more people.
Yeah, it reaches more people and they can watch it. And yeah, so.
Totally. Okay. Well, we're about 12 minutes in, and I did a very, very poor job in providing a bigger picture of actually who you are, Brian. For the very
first things first, right?
I'm so interested in Dubai. That's why I asked that first. To the very slight chance that there are some people that don't know who you are or what you're doing in the CrossFit space, maybe just give a quick introduction. Who is Brian Friend?
It's a great question. I mean, many years ago, I was just a guy who'd finished playing college sports. I was looking for something to do. One of my friends invited me to a gym. It was a CrossFit affiliate, and I started training there in fall of 2013. The next year, I was introduced to the sport. I went to the North Central Regional in Navy Pier in Chicago, Illinois, in the U.S., and I saw a couple things there that I liked, a couple things that I didn't like, but I became really interested in the sport. Over the next 5 years, I studied the methodology as much as I studied the sport. I watched all the old YouTube videos, CrossFit Games, everything I could get my hands on, reading the journal articles, the famous ones from Greg Glassman dating back to early 2000s, and took my level 1. I was like coaching a little bit here and there. I was also a high school teacher and coach at that time. And then in 2018, I just took a chance, sent a DM to Savan Matosian. He responded, gave me an opportunity, and everything since then has that was a turning point for me, and not only in my profession, but kind of in my life.
Yeah.
And so I was flown out to HQ, did a podcast there. He invited me to regionals. We did some podcasts, and it was like trial by fire. The first few podcasts we did had Pat Vellner, Katra Davidsdottir, Ben Bergeron. The next week, Josh Bridges, Max Mormont.
Was that
2018 regionals, and then Dave Castro. And it's like just those 6 people you're talking about. Like you've had podium finishers on the men's and women's side, the best coach at the time, the director of the games, and in all these cases, you're just there. It's live. The cameras are on, the lights are on, big switchboards, it's going to a CrossFit. And I just realized that for whatever reason, all those years of preparation, studying, reading, watching, it was sticking in my mind. That year at the games, we were supposed to do more podcasts. It was kind of at the beginning of Greg Glassman shutting down the media department, so we didn't do that. I integrated with Tyson Oldroyd's documentary team. That was the documentary that didn't get released for like 4 years later. But I met a ton of people that year, including a woman who at that time, her husband was in the Department of Defense for the U.S., and she was stationed in Germany. She'd been working at the regionals in Europe for a couple of years, and she was a massive help in giving me opportunities during the sanctional seasons. So I went to, maybe a dozen sanctionals over the next 15 months before COVID happened, and continued to just build this network of people. I was able to guest on, the popular podcasts at the time, like Talking Like Fitness and Get With The Programming as they were kind of starting up. I got an offer to write for the Morning Chalk Up, which I did for nearly 3 years. And as I continued to meet new people and have more experiences, many people were suggesting that eventually I do my own thing. One thing led to another, and Be Friendly Fitness was born. Patrick Clark and Chad Mueller are like the reasons that I'm able to do that. With the help of Rodri Mora now in Spain, we're able to do much more high-level broadcasting and live streaming of events. And I think I've done, almost 60 events in the last 2 years.
That's crazy.
It's I think this is important to say because of the future things we're about to talk about. But to me, there's been this debate since 2018 of should the sport of CrossFit separate from the methodology of CrossFit. Mm-hmm. And what I've seen through the experiences that I've had is that from a business perspective, whether that happens or not is one thing. But from just a practical perspective, the methodology absolutely points to competition, and competition absolutely enhances the methodology. And so I can explain that more if you want, but that's something that I think I try to emphasize that message to as many people as I can who are interested in talking about it, because a lot of people want to look for the divide, but I think that those two things very much work together symbiotically.
Okay. Have you always done your own thing, or have you ever been on the payroll, like on a regular payroll of CrossFit HQ, or have you always been kind of freelancing, just to have a better picture?
So 2018, I worked, I wasn't like, I was working for CrossFit at the Games in kind of like a entry level, like almost like an internship role.
Okay.
But in 2019, 21, 22, and 23, I was actually contracted by either the Games or the broadcast company who produces the broadcast for the Games in a paid position, and also for semifinals. But those were independent contract roles, not working consistently on the payroll for CrossFit HQ or for Hamilton Road Productions, the broadcast company. So I have worked at the Games, but those are in contract positions, and I mean, almost all of the jobs that I had are independently contracted jobs for competitions throughout the year around the world.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. As I mentioned in the briefing, I would like to travel with you guys back in time to the 8th of August, 2024. It is my first chance, and I don't know, maybe also your first chance, Shireen, to talk to somebody who actually was in Fort Worth, who was in Texas, who experienced firsthand the tragic event that happened at the CrossFit Games. Maybe before we get into that, let me ask you, how well did you know Lazar? How well do you know Luca? How involved have you been with people close to Lazar and Lazar himself?
I consider myself extremely fortunate and grateful to have relationships of various depths with most of the elite athletes in this sport. And near the top of that list, if not at the top of that list, would have been Lazar. There's maybe 2 or 3 other athletes that I would say I have a similar level of depth in the relationships with them that I have had with him. And, those things, you guys know this, like those develop naturally and organically over time. The first time I saw him compete and was like a true believer in how good he could be was actually in Dubai in 2019. That year, not just him, but Roman Krennikov was the first time I got to see them live compete. The top 5 that year were Fikowski, Vellner, Roman, BKG, Lazar. And I mean, I don't need to tell anyone who's a fan of this sport, if you're competing with Vellner, Fikowski, and BKG in 2019, you're competitive with those guys. Beating Jonikoski, beating Jeff Adler, beating Tola, Jason Smith, who was a top 10 Games athlete the year before. Like, you got my attention. But I didn't get to know Lazar that year. A few years later, 2022, semifinals in Lowlands, it was the first of his 3 semifinal victories in Europe, is where I would say like the next evolution of our friendships started. The previous year in 2021, he and his brother both qualified online through the European semifinals to the Games. And Sevan and I did a podcast with them because I had already had a friendship with Lazar and then kind of by association with Luca. And that was actually a great podcast. If you want to see, just like who he was and who he was with his brother, I would recommend going back and watching that episode from the 2021. They were at the Games, so it would be during the Games week that year.
I'll link it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's a very good episode. And look, whether you like him or not, Sevan has been a massive catalyst and advocate for exposing people to CrossFit athletes over the years. And when I was doing shows with him regularly, he was very open-minded to if I suggested someone or some people to be on the show, to doing those shows. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, especially for the North American CrossFit community, that was their first introduction to the Dukic brothers. And it was a great introduction. They're laughing, they're smiling, they're joking with each other, and that's who they are.
Yeah. I actually do have some pictures with me. Like, you can just see. I mean, if you know them, you know, but you can see how close they are, and then how passionate they were for the sport. And
As I continued to get to know them, and I think this is important, especially if you are reading the words that Luka has written since the games, and you think that they're exaggerations or over the top sort of things, that these two men have invested their entire life to the pursuit of excellence in this sport. And they're as big of students of their opponents, of the history, of the evolution of competition as anyone. Like, if they wanted to do it, and I invited them to be on podcasts prior to competitions they were competing in, they would be able to assess their opponents better than I could do.
Yeah.
And I mean that. Like, they really understand the nuance of what it takes to be great in the sport. It doesn't just happen. Like, and it's a daily discipline. It's a commitment and a passion that's hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
I have had probably two really intimate opportunities to get to know Lazar off the competition floor, and they were at the 2023 Madrid Championships and the 2023 Dubai Fitness Championships. So both of those were about 15 and 12 months ago. And during those times, I would say that our friendship and relationship, developed into that echelon that I was describing, of being one of the 2 or 3 closest relationships that I've been privileged to have with any athlete in this sport. And that's because we spoke about things that weren't CrossFit, and weren't sport. And the primary things that we spoke about were love, relationships, family, brothers. We're both older brothers, and dreams and passions, and just like life. So I was really close with him, and I feel like I knew him on many levels, not just as an athlete.
I can really hear that when you describe your relationship with him.
When did he compete in the at Lowlands? Because I was at Lowlands when Luka got 6th place. That was, and Moritz Fiebig was 5th, right? That was exciting, but also heartbreaking. It was 2022. Okay.
Yeah, that was a wild finish to that.
Yeah, that was really wild. And
Uldis almost blew it. Luka blew it. Adrian.
Yeah.
Because
Russian and ones. Yeah.
So there were 5 guys. Everything shifted.
It was such a cool competition to watch. I was so glad to get to see Lazar competing live, but also Luka, like both of them. It's one of my coolest memories of CrossFit, watching CrossFit competitions.
It was Lowlands.
It was Lowlands 2022. Even though the ending was not, the result was not what they wanted, but it was just very nice to watch them side by side, and they were so fired up, and it was just special to see the brothership and the bond that you can. It's hard to explain when you haven't seen it live.
As I said before, I never had the chance to talk to anybody who actually was in Fort Worth on the 8th of August, 2024. Can you describe to our listeners, to our viewers, as first of all, what was your role at that day in Texas, and how did you experience everything that happened on that day? Just as one more note, I think it was a morning chalk up. They made a timeline of the events that happened. It is, again, very poorly printed. And I believe you don't need it. Just from your perspective, how did that day unfold?
Well, that timeline, Mike Halpin created that timeline. He's known and knowable on Instagram, and the timeline that was released on publicly is a subset of a much, much bigger one that he created, and I helped him create that. Actually.
Oh, really?
So I have not just a very personal experience with it happened that day, but a really high level of insight into. It's been one of the hardest things, when you know a lot more about a topic than the majority of the people who are interested in the topic. you have to be you have to be somewhat selective about how and when you share those things. And whether it's CrossFit HQ and the games team, Luca, people like me, most people who have a great amount of depth and understanding of the totality of what happened that day and in the lead up to that day haven't shared everything about it yet. And there's a lot of legal reasons why for certain entities. And then there's also respect.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to respect CrossFit's investigation. I participated in that investigation. And I have an understanding of what their purpose, intent, timeline was with doing that. And I didn't want to jump the gun. I didn't want to, I want the same way that I didn't want to just hastily decide to leave the CrossFit Games. I wanted to give them a chance. I wanted to see what the tribute ceremony would be like, how they would proceed. Would that kind of be something that I was supportive of or not? And in the process of that, staying there for the time that I did, I learned some things that most people, especially that weekend, would not have had the privilege to learn because of the relationship that I had with Lazar and Luca and Anya, his longtime partner. So the first thing that you asked was about my role at the Games.
Yes.
And this is actually one of the things that is, to me, extremely important for people to understand. And I think many people have maybe made an assumption about this without having necessarily intimate knowledge about it. But there's a very real reality at the CrossFit Games for Dave Castro and his team this year, which is they did not have the same access to financial resources that they've had in previous years.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And you could see this in the case studies that Andrew Hiller has done, where he says, look at the level of detail and care and safety that was implemented on all these water events throughout the history of the Games that wasn't present this year. Why would that be? That's not because it's a different person running the Games. It's not because of they don't know what they're doing. It's because they didn't have the same access to financial resources. Why don't they have the same access to financial resources? Because the company that is CrossFit is owned by a different company. It's owned by a private equity firm who has one driving factor: buy company, sell company for more. And CrossFit's not their only company of interest in that. So when they are looking at things, they're looking at a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to kind of explain that. This year, for the first time since 2018, I wasn't inside the ropes, as they say. I wasn't working for CrossFit or the broadcast company. During that time, I've also worked at a majority of the regionals or semifinals. And this year, the broadcast company didn't have the same budget, just like the competition team didn't have the same budget that they've had in different years. And so at multiple levels, different decisions were made, different personnel were hired, and they had to adjust to a changing economic landscape. So because of that, I was there in a media or press role with my company, Be Friendly Fitness. So I was outside the ropes. And the difference between inside the ropes and outside the ropes is relevant on multiple levels. First of all, if you're inside the ropes, you have more freedom to move around the competition floor than you do if you're outside the ropes. You have more access to information generally than if you're outside the ropes. And so, those things are relevant when I talk about my experience that day, and frustrating, quite frankly, because, despite everything that I was aware of that was going on, there was much less that I could do about it than in the previous years. And there was also a higher risk, and it's easy for me to feel really guilty about that because, I didn't want to get kicked out of the Games. Mm-hmm. There's some people in the CrossFit space that for whatever reason are looking for a reason to kick me out of the Games. And I have been kicked out of the Games before. But, so I don't know. That's just to kind of set the stage, I guess.
Yeah. Like at event 1, I do have a map of the lake that the swim event was in. Where were you positioned at the lake?
So,
you know that is it the start of the finish line?
I was at the starting line.
Yeah.
And, after the athletes ran, it was they went out. Basically, the event was a circle. They started, they ran around the lake, they got in the lake, and they finished the circle to finish back where they started, more or less. So once they started and ran out of sight, I turned on the live stream. And I was watching the live stream on my phone. Chase Ingram and Adrian Conway were doing the call. The coverage was pretty good. It's very difficult to cover an offsite event like that. And as they were doing that, I worked my way back to the finish line. As media, we were not allowed to go to the other side of the lake where the entry point was. And this has nothing to do with Lazar's death, but just from a competition standpoint, I would have loved, and like a data collection standpoint, I would love to have had somebody there to track the times that they were getting in the water and getting out of the water. Like, CrossFit has access to a lot of this information, but it would be interesting for me personally as an analyst and a commentator, et cetera, to be able to say, oh, this athlete got into the water 12th and got out 2nd. This person got in 2nd and got out 15th. And we could see instead of just seeing the results, you could see just with those 2 data points, more information about who is excelling on the run versus the swim, who might have made a good pacing decision or strategy compared to someone who didn't. And, so long story short, we had to be at the finish line. So we were at the finish line. Specifically, I was standing maybe 10 meters away from the finish line, like where they would run past after crossing the finish line. And there was a big black archway, Roca balloon finish line arch that was over the finish line and therefore obstructing, from my point of view, the exact spot where Lazar ended up going under the water. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's where I was standing. I was standing pretty close to Mike Halpin. I was standing pretty close to Joe Genetin Palawa of the Morning Chalk Up and a couple other media members.
And the event basically was 2 parts. It was running and then it was swimming afterwards. And you can see on the timeline that Lazar and I think Jelle Hoste were actually quite close together. And they were at the very last part of the swim. And then we all know the tragedy happened and Lazar actually couldn't make it to the end of the lake.
I mean,
did you see
a couple of days prior to the event, Lazar was I think the last podcast I did before the competition, and he said, I want to win that event. I want to have the leader's jersey. I'm expecting to lose it at some point and regain it on the last day. That was, paraphrasing his words.
Yeah,
it was important to him to win that event. There's not a lot of people that get the chance to wear the leader's jersey at the games, and there's not a lot of people that look at an event and say, I'm probably the favorite to win that event 1, which means that jersey can be mine. So he was pushing hard. And if you know Lazar, he's pushed himself to the limits before where his body has shut down in competition. It happened in the Burj Khalifa run. It happened at the end of the Capitol a couple of years ago at the Games. And I think this is also an important detail because there should be nobody in the history of our sport who has a more intimate understanding of the level that the athletes are willing to push themselves to than Dave Castro. He's been there since the inception or birth of it. He should be very well aware with Greg Glassman's favorite words that the fear of failure is greater than the fear of death and that athletes will die for points. This is written in a journal article. I believe there's an audio recording of him saying one or the other of those things. And from the very first CrossFit Games, if you go back and watch, you'll see this. And there's some more famous examples. 2015 Murph is a very classic one, but especially when the workouts are in hot environments and exceed 30 minutes in time domain, like you need to be on point from a medical safety and risk mitigation perspective because the athletes will make irresponsible decisions for their health to try to win an extra point on the field of play. And Dave has to know that as good as anybody. And he also is the only person who would be able to make a decision based on the resources that are available at the games to do or not do something. And I haven't heard anyone really talk about this because it should be clear from what I've already said that when given the opportunity, Dave will go to extreme lengths to ensure the safety of the athletes. But he wasn't given that opportunity from a financial perspective this year. And from everything that I've been able to tell, he was willing to risk that for the test instead of sacrifice the test for the safety of the athletes.
Gotcha.
And that alone is the reason why I cannot understand how he is still in the position he's in. It has nothing to do with him as a person. It has nothing to do with him as a programmer or a director of sport or as a critical, pivotal, and influential person in the development of the health and fitness space over the last 20 years. But when you are in that position of authority and you have the ability to make a decision with the resources and the knowledge that he has, and you make the wrong decision, you lose your job. That's not a CrossFit thing. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And so it's very confusing to me that in the context of all of that he's not only still in that position, but also almost in an elevated position where some of these new created elements are still, and additionally reporting to him.
Yeah.
I know we've probably gone out of order for what you were hoping there, but I just feel like that's important to say. I've really spent a lot of time thinking about that.
Okay.
I feel like I'm expressing that absent of emotion, of just sitting back for a few months, thinking about it, taking in all the information and looking at it. And it's the reason why it's difficult for me to know what's the right thing to do moving forward. Mm-hmm. I know I'm jumping the gun on this.
You are, but it doesn't matter. Go on.
So maybe we'll just put a pin in that and come back to that concept when we talk about the 2025 season, and I can share with you what happened that day from my perspective.
Totally.
Yeah. Just one side question. What was the communication with, did you talk to him after all those things happened?
Dave Castro?
Yeah, with Dave.
I have not.
Not. Okay, so you weren't
That day, I did reach out to a few people in CrossFit, and I never. The only person I heard back, I did not reach out to Dave. The only person I heard back from was Don Fall.
Okay.
The next week, I was able to have a conversation with him. He and I have exchanged a minimal number of text messages since.
Yeah.
I have seen a couple members of the CrossFit HQ or CrossFit staff at competitions and had conversations with them, but it's been relatively minimal communication.
Okay.
I think it's been relatively minimal communication for most of them to most people. And I would guess, I'm guessing that, I don't know this for sure, that is per the instructions of their lawyers or legal team.
Yeah, to not talk to anyone.
And I have not reached out to Dave. I've been thinking a lot about him because the people who I do know who've seen him and talked to him have said that, this really messed him up, understandably.
Yeah.
So I've been, in my own personal, spiritual thoughts and concepts, I've been hoping that he is able to deal with this well, emotionally and personally. I mean, as a father, I can't imagine that he hasn't thought about what if this had been my kids, that this had happened to my kids under someone else's watch. And I mentioned that I am feeling certain levels of guilt about that day. Of course, he would be feeling something similarly. So absent of any of the things that I said about how I think that it should have been handled professionally with regards to him, I'm very empathetic of the fact that I'm sure this has been a huge emotional trauma for him too.
Yeah.
What was actually the first piece of information that you received on site on the 8th of August that told you that something's off, that something has happened, that something is not going the way it should?
So at 7:30 a.m. that morning, they were doing the event, and Chase Ingram said on the live stream, hey, because we had, obviously Lazar was in the lead at that point. Mm-hmm. So you're getting, and it's once an 800 meter swim and you have to cover the whole breadth of that. You're not able to show everything that's going on. You're going to focus on the leaders and then you'll bring people across the finish line. That's just kind of the best you can do. That's the best they can do with the decisions that they've made. Again, for years, I've been hoping that we would implement some kind of advancement in technology so that in water events or long distance running events, we could tap into the advancements in technology by putting a little chip in the cap or on their chip timer where we could, you could actually see where each of the athletes are. Obviously, from a safety perspective, that would be incredible as well. And looking back, it's kind of like, with all of the ways that human race has progressed technology, why don't major sports do that? Is it? And I don't know. Maybe it's just incredibly expensive and you can't do it. But I kind of feel like there's got to be a way where I could just literally track that. I know that the government knows that my phone is right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But they don't do that. So 7:30 a.m., he's in the lead. And Chase goes, Chase is a former collegiate swimmer, and he's speaking like that looks like someone who's struggling in water. His head wasn't very high above water. His shoulders weren't above the water. He was alternating between a breaststroke and a couple strokes of freestyle. He was looking around, and I was actually texting with Chase that morning. I text with the commentators, Sean Woodland, Adrian Conway, Chase Ingram, at many competitions that I'm at when I'm not involved in the commentary team or when I am on the broadcast team and the production side. Just to kind of, in the interest of providing the fans at home with the best information, if they're not on site and able to watch the way that I am, I'll just provide them with information. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. That's not the point. It's just for them to have it if they do want to use it. And so I suggested to him at that time, maybe he's just keeping track of where Jelle is and just doing enough to win. Because in our sport currently with the scoring system, it doesn't matter if you win by a second or a minute, you're going to get the same number of points. And he didn't care about crushing the competition. He just wanted 100 points in the leader jersey. Yeah. I was wrong about that. It's a speculation. Clearly he was struggling in water. But if I'm on the broadcast team listening to that, it's like, that's an alarming thing. That's a red flag. Our guy, Chase Ingram, who has a lot of experience swimming, has done this event himself, is identifying a guy who's in the lead of this competition, who has a notable swimming and water polo background, as appearing to show signs of struggling in water. So I'm conscious of that as someone who's watching the live stream. As they rounded the last corner and we could see them for the first time, Jelle had already overtaken him. And I've turned off the live stream as I'm now, watching for two purposes. One, obviously hoping that Lazar is okay and going to make it across, but also, tracking the athletes coming in. I was going to make a little reel of, some of the better like celebrations of people finishing the swim, because, if 79 athletes finish it, you're going to get some cool shots. Even on an iPhone, you can make a little quick reel that can tell quite a powerful story. So I was doing that, and Jelle comes in, Brent comes in, and as Tia's coming in for the women, there's audio. It's in Mike Halpin's timeline that he posted from that morning of Joe, Jonathan Palawa, and myself asking the question. This is like between 7:37 and 7:38 a.m. of where is Lazar?
Yeah.
And, we were basically aware of the fact that he should be coming out of the water now, and we don't see him. And again, that Roca balloon was directly obstructing the point of view from where we are. For the millionth time in her career, in an event where the girls are going against the guys, Tia is beating 95% of the field. And so the timing of what happened during that 1 minute from when he went underwater was the perfect storm of terrible circumstances. She distracted a lot of people from anything else that was going on because of her dominating performance. There was also an athlete swimming off course that was distracting one of the paddleboarders out there as they were trying to correct their course to get them back on. And with those two things happening simultaneously, the people who had the opportunity to do the most about the fact that he was actively drowning took their eyes off of him. Because of that Roca balloon, those of us who were conscientiously aware of the fact that something was amiss couldn't see him from where we are.
And also, sorry when I interrupt, but also because I watched the live stream and the on-site commentator also announced, because I think when Luca was coming out of the water, he announced that Lazar is coming out of the water. I just heard Lazar's name, which also was, I think, kind of a distraction. Okay, maybe he's already out. And and I've seen, and even I just watched it on my laptop on YouTube. I was aware that that's not Lazar. And that was for me, the first time it was strange. I had just not a good feeling.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's sort of the next, bullet point in the timeline for me that morning that is notable and is relevant. Prior to, his name is Larry, who was doing the MC on site that morning, prior to him saying Lazar, when it was actually Luca coming out of the water, I was beginning to panic. And Chad, who works with me and was responsible for, gathering most of the footage that we would use for our, post-event documentary that we would release, was trying to kind of calm me down so that I didn't get myself in trouble. And when he said that, and Lazar Dukic, obviously that got my attention. I looked up and I knew before he corrected himself that wasn't Lazar, obviously. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, this is not, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And Chad goes, let's go. We got to get you out of here. Let's go to the cold tubs and check. We'll see if he's over there. And we'll talk to some athletes and whatever, because I think he was concerned that I was going to do something rash.
Mm-hmm.
I can be emotional in moments and be rash things. So it probably was a responsible thing for him to think on my behalf and on our behalf as, Be Friendly Fitness. So on the way over there, I saw Anya. Yeah, she was crying. Anyone who has gone to a competitive event of any kind to watch their loved one compete knows that they are going to be watching their loved one compete more closely than anyone else. Let's be honest. Anya doesn't care about the other 77 competitors in the water. 95% of her interest is in Lazar and 5% in Luca.
Yeah.
That's it. So when you see the one person who's going to know better than anyone else where that person is crying at that moment, it's gut-wrenching, and that's when I started thinking, oh my God, did he drown? Chad pulled me along. We went to the ice baths. We were doing some conversations there with Dallin Pepper and Brent Fikowski, and during that interview, Luca walks by, and the athletes obviously know who I am, and they know, just like most people would know, that I'm pretty good at keeping track of what's going on in an event and in the totality of the competition. There have been documented incidences on live streams before of athletes specifically seeking me out and coming over to ask me questions about how their performance relative to others, where they finished, did they qualify, did they win? And Luca, who's also seen Anya at this point, is also in a panic, is already trying to find out where his brother is, because his brother obviously should have come in before him and hasn't, sees me and asks me that question, where's Lazar? And for the second time, it's crossed my mind, oh my God, he's drowned. This is like 7:47, 7:48 a.m. They didn't pull his body out of the water till 10:20 or 10:30 a.m., something like that. So I stopped interviewing the other athletes. The response I gave to Luca was that, this is the CrossFit Games. They have an incredible medical team. I'm sure he's with them. And at that point, do I believe that I'm saying that? I don't know. No is that probably not, but I have to believe that. Yeah. At that point, it's the only option, and it's the only thing I can think of to say to him. He continues looking for him. Anya's obviously trying to get their attention at this point. Josie, who is the documentary videographer, who's very, very close with Lazar, and is involved in that process too. And, you've seen some of the accounts. Dave was not ignoring them. He went and asked the scoring team, has the chip timer come in? Originally, they said yes. Yeah. That's pretty frustrating. Then he said no. Then they said no. Him and Henrik Apolainen's chip timers were missing. I guess Henrik's had fallen off. We obviously know why Lazar's didn't come in. But that misinformation is not a great kind of beacon in that moment either. Personally, I moved away from that area and I went to watch the live stream back. This is before they pulled the live stream down. And I have a series of screenshots on my phone where I'm basically tracking every moment from when we can first see him getting close to that corner to the last moment that we see him on the live stream, because I'm still holding out hope, probably foolishly, honestly, that if he's gone under, that if I can find the exact spot that he went under, that maybe I can get that information to somebody who can find him.
Yeah.
And by now it's like 8:10, 8:15, something like that. And it is actually, I was able to track him all the way up to the last frame that he's visible on the live stream. And a couple minutes later, the live stream was gone.
Yeah.
There are some other people that were live streaming it. You can still find it, I think, on YouTube somewhere, maybe some Spanish speaking channels or something like that. But the stream of the games for Event 1 no longer exists on YouTube. Understandably so from a legal perspective, but I had that information. So I went down towards the finish line. I got Dave's attention. He allowed me to come down to the entryway to the water there. I showed him, this is the last moment and the last spot where he was visible on the live stream. He said, thank you. And I left, I left Dave's side, because what else am I going to do at that point? And I stayed there all the way until they pulled his body out of the water. I watched that happen. I watched them wrap it in the sheet. I watched them drive the other way across the lake until the boat was out of sight. I went down to talk to Josie and Lazar and Anya and give them a hug. I mean, what, there's nothing to say or do in a moment like that. But those are, I just felt like I had to see them.
Yeah.
And I specifically said to both of them, if you need anything, which I think, what does that even mean to say that? But I meant it. And I offered to travel with Luke. I couldn't even imagine whenever he was going to travel back if he had to do that journey alone. And then I left the venue, and it was one of the most hallowing and empty feelings that I've ever had in my life.
I remember they did finish the event, because probably you cannot cancel an event like that while it's going. I don't know if you could, but they did finish it. So every athlete crossed the finish line, of course, except for Lazar.
Yeah.
And then I believe that next heat would have been the team competition, right?
Yeah. And they already brought, I think, the teams in. I think they already were at the lake. And then they, were pulled back and it was cancelled, basically. This is, what I remember when I watched the live stream. But it was, so for me, from my perspective, watching it, and of course I don't know, like Lazar, Luca, no one like personally, but at least I've seen them competing live. And it was so strange because I had immediately a very bad feeling. Like my intuition is when like the MC announced Lazar's crossing the finish line, but it was Luca. That was also like the sticking point for me, where I was all wrong. Something is very off. Something is happening. I had a very bad feeling. And then I think there were some people from Austria there, just watching, spectating, and a friend of mine, she was like, that was friend of her, like my team mate, but basically, and we texted back and forth, and she was saying, hey, that those friends are on site and they are like, something is going on and there's something happening. Lazar is missing and that's not good. And I just remember, like, that day I was so devastated. As I said, I didn't know Lazar personally, or nor Luca or any family member, but he's just as an European athlete, and like, I was just devastated. I couldn't work that day. I couldn't train. It was just, there was so many things that was going on in my mind. Also, like, I did swim events as well. Like, of course, not an 800-meter swim, like open water, but it was just, I couldn't believe it. I was in denial a long time. And when I came to the gym, everyone I spoke to were just in shock. Yeah. Like, our whole community was in shock. And for a long time, not only that day, but like for the next days and weeks, we were all in shock. We were just, we couldn't believe it.
I remember also it was a very weird feeling. I didn't know either of them. I said happy birthday to Luca once at Dubai. I think it was 23 because his birthday is around like these days.
It was yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah, perfect, yeah. Like last year, I said happy birthday to Luca, and he was super nice, but I didn't know them, of course. But still, when I read, I think the first piece of information I got was from the morning chalk up that Lazar is missing. And I had this like knot in my throat, and it felt very, very, very weird.
Yeah. Because the European CrossFit community is kind of close. Yeah. Of course, you don't know everyone and on a personal level, but we are just, it's just tragic because, there are not so many of like those special.
Yeah.
human beings, like special athletes, and she was like a very special one.
That's true.
And
that is very true.
It was devastating. Like,
Brian, did you stay in Texas after the 8th of August? Have you been there for the rest of the games?
I left on Sunday. That was a Thursday. Obviously, the rest of the events that day were canceled. I had a really, really good support network of people there with me. I was privileged enough to have some conversations with some people that day who have information about things that happened in the run-up to the games that are not traditional. And when we look at past games, the organization structure, safety protocols, etc., surrounding that event, I believe all for financial resource reasons were not in alignment with what Dave and his team would typically do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I feel that they should have made different decisions based on that. They did not. And that day, really unexpectedly, I was able to learn some things that helped contextualize the risks that he and his team chose to take, despite not having the normal resources available. Obviously, they then announced, they had that thing going on with the athletes and the conversations going on there. I wasn't allowed at that. No media was allowed there. Obviously, everyone in the media knows the athletes and the coaches and the people who were there, and a majority of media who chose to were getting in from some of us who weren't even chose to were just getting information as it was happening from there, secondhand, obviously. What didn't seem like, the greatest meeting that ever happened, but how could you expect it to be? I mean, nobody's prepared for that. You assume that everyone's trying to do the best they can with the information that they have and the information that they're given. Even from that first day, I have to, again, I don't know this for sure. I just have to assume that within, minutes of realizing that an athlete had died during the competition, that the legal team of CrossFit is communicating with Dave and with Don about what can and can't be done, what should and shouldn't be done. I feel like that's a safe assumption to make. And there's also financial implications to consider. Don't forget that we've kind of initiated this whole conversation by talking about that the Berkshire Partners, the owning company of CrossFit, is interested in buying the company for X and selling it for X plus something. Now, if you just cancel the CrossFit Games, you're going to have a big financial loss. A lot of your stakeholders, meaning sponsors, vendors, partners, are going to have that loss. All of the fans are going to probably demand refunds for their tickets, potentially their travel. It's a nightmare financially to have to cancel the World Championship event of any sport.
Yeah.
So again, I'm trying to express as much as I can with as little emotion as possible about an extremely emotional situation, but in order to understand how Dave and his team acted that day, you have to consider those factors as being relevant in his decision-making and communication with the athletes and the community.
But the thing is, he or the team that brought the athletes and the coaches in, and basically, because it's from the outside, it seemed to be, okay, it's not just a CrossFit HQ decision, but they brought the athletes in and the coaches in to basically make a decision together. And Ryan, what would you say? I mean, given the fact that the athletes just were informed about, okay, one of the fellow athletes died, and just a few hours later they were brought in to make such a decision, like, should the CrossFit Games go on? Do you want to still compete? I mean, I can't even imagine how hard this must be also for every athlete. I mean, there are lots of athletes who are very close to Lazar. Lazar was one of the favorites, like, overall, because of his character and his, like, person. I mean, what would you say was that the right way to tackle that? I mean, is there a right way?
Probably not, but
Probably not, but from your perspective.
I don't think that meeting was necessary. I think it was trying to show a good gesture towards the athletes to include them in the conversation. But from what I understand, that decision was already made. The games were going to continue, probably because of what I just said regarding the financial implications of canceling it. And personally, I was able to find out the things that the majority of the world found out when Luka made his post in September about the fact that he didn't exactly give his blessing to Dave the way that Dave represented that to the athletes first and later to the community. Because I was able to speak to Luka the next morning, Friday morning at about 4 a.m. Neither of us were sleeping. I just sent him a message. He happened to respond. He did an Instagram video call with me for like 45 minutes. And he talked me through that day for him. Dave and Nicole coming to his room, the conversation that was had there, what he said, what he didn't say, what they said, what they didn't say, how Dave proceeded to, interpret or represent that conversation. And so again, now I'm in a situation where I have information that most people don't have and that Luka has asked me to respect the privacy of.
Yeah.
And that's important for your question that's precipitated this conversation, because as I go to the competition venue that day, I more or less am understanding that I'm in a room, the arena, with however many tens of thousands of people, and the number of people who probably have access to information that I have is in the single digits.
Yeah.
Obviously, Dave, Nicole, Carol, for the moments that Luka and Anya were in the stadium. And outside of that, I can't be sure if anyone. I think maybe Craig Ritchie and Jazz, maybe Josie, but there's a very limited number of people at this point that would have had the access to the information that I had. And so I am generally someone who likes to give second chances and give people a chance before condemning them for whatever. And so I was eager to see how the atmosphere and environment would be, how the tribute service would be, how the first event would be, what would the athletes do, what would the competition do. And overall, given the things that I knew, that Dave was speaking to that camera. People have seen that since then, where he says, with the blessing of the family. I was standing like 10 feet in front of him. I heard him saying that after just speaking to Luka 5 or 6 hours before in the morning, telling me that wasn't exactly the case. So, what would you do in a situation like that? He's now telling the entire community that you've invested your whole life in, that has changed my entire life for the good. Like, my whole life is better because of CrossFit. And I see him. Is it a lie? Is it a misrepresentation? You tell me. But imagine being in that situation. What would you do? How do you handle that? You're looking at this guy saying these things after talking to the brother of a man who just died, and he's misrepresenting at the very least. It was a very complicated situation for me. That morning, Patrick and I did a podcast. I asked Luka if it was okay to say the things that we said on that podcast. Our primary goal of the podcast that morning was to celebrate the positive aspects of our relationship and experience with Lazar as a person and an athlete. I hope that we did that well. We got a lot of positive feedback on that, and I've actually continued to get positive feedback on some of the things that I've done publicly since then, which feels really good, because there's also some people who have been pretty critical of my choices and words and things that I've done since then. So I feel that given the totality of the circumstances on that next 24 hours, that I did the best that I could for Lazar, for Luka, without trying to overstep in any way as well. Feeling very angry, sad, hurt. That day went on, and Friday was like it's like vacant in my mind. Like, it was like a nothingness. Like, I remember watching Justin Medeiros crying doing deadlifts. I remember watching Moritz look like a shell of himself on the competition floor. I remember just seeing female athletes that have clearly just been crying their eyes out in the corrals prior to taking the competition floor. And I'm just thinking to myself, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And I want to just give those couple examples, because 24 hours later, during the clean ladder for the men, the music is back to full volume in the stadium. There's no more somberness. There was no more mention of him. I see the wave going on. I see people doing a giddy up cowboy dance in the stadium. I see, some athletes were still very conscientious of what was happening and conflicted about what was going on. But for some of them, and I don't necessarily blame the athletes this much because of what Shireen said, when it's 3, 2, 1, go, and you're an athlete and that's your job, you do your job. You celebrate and you move on. And I don't think that whatever any athlete did, said on the competition floor, that takes away from the fact that they were completely devastated, every single one of them, by the loss of one of their, peers the previous day. But just looking at everything else and thinking about, again, what's the motivating factor for the private equity company who is undoubtedly giving directions to Don, giving directions to Dave. We need this thing to continue to go on. We need, if you're only assessing it from a business perspective, what's the best case scenario? That people forget about it.
Yeah,
totally.
And so, but I didn't feel good about that. Yeah. And it was during the men's clean ladder on Saturday where I said to Chad, you need to get me out of here before I do something that I'm going to regret.
But the thing is, from a just business perspective, I wouldn't say that's the best thing that can happen, because if you think of the long-term effects, and if you think of what that did to the CrossFit community overall, and that brand CrossFit, that wasn't good.
No,
that wasn't good. It was, at the end of the day, it was, sorry when I'm saying it, but it was a shit show.
Yeah.
And for me,
we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah. And from my point of view, and I know that it's not the best thing financially, it wouldn't have been the best thing financially, but it should have been canceled.
And I think there's a lot of people that agree with that. And I really do appreciate that perspective, because there's a big difference between making a decision that looks like the best decision in the short run and a decision that's going to be the best for the perseverance or the preservation of your company in the long run. And I still think that it's very likely that some of the decisions that were made early on are going to, come back to bite them in the ass at some point.
Yeah.
That largely remains to be seen. I don't think we've seen, at least on a big scale, we haven't necessarily seen that yet.
No.
I'm not entirely sure to what extent we will see it over the next couple months or a year, but there's definitely still a risk that some of those early decisions could end up having major and severe long-term implications.
Yeah, totally agree.
I do have one last question, and it's a minor detail. A couple of days or sometime after all what happened, Luca posted quite a long Instagram post, and he explained basically what happened from his side. And he mentioned that there was an autopsy, and that the result of the autopsy showed that it was not a heart attack that caused Lazar to drown. At least that's what I know. Do you know what the actual cause was that Lazar drowned? That what happened?
Well, I would like to say this. On Saturday, I left the games. Mm-hmm. On Saturday evening, I made a post on Instagram saying that I was leaving the games, and it was vague because of the reasons that I mentioned. I didn't feel that it was my right to share the things that Luca had shared with me because he'd asked me not to. But I had that information, and you can't ignore it when you have it. And there have been people that have been very vocally critical of me for that. If you're going to say something like that, tell us all the information. And I think that's pretty unfair perspective for them to have. I wanted people to know that on that day, there was already things that have happened and were happening that were not okay. But I didn't want to disrespect the intimate relationship and knowledge of that information that I was privileged to have from Luca himself. The next morning, I decided to host a little service because there was a judge at the CrossFit Games who's married to a woman from Serbia. And I was getting information simultaneously about how the Serbian CrossFit community, fitness community, was perceiving what was happening in Texas. And it was very negative. They were very disappointed, felt extremely disrespected. And he shared with me some of the things that they would have liked to see. And just as a general thing in life, I don't mind if people complain to me about something. I like it a lot more when they also offer a solution-oriented mindset. And he provided me that, and he wasn't in the right position to necessarily do a service like that. But after listening to what he said, I was like, I can do something like this. And so we decided to have a service at the lake the next morning. There's a small group of people that showed up, maybe 100. A lot of athletes, coaches, media, some judges, some people who just said they were working at the games that said, I'll be back after the service. I'm doing this. A lot of the athletes were unable to come because CrossFit adjusted the timeline of when they were able to, of a briefing for the next day. And so they couldn't be there, but I think so many of them would have liked to have been there. And I know that a lot of people around the world were able to watch that, and that it felt like one of the more meaningful kind of grieving opportunities for them since then. So I'm really grateful for Ed giving me that information, and for Patrick and Chad and Rodri helping me to set that up and make that possible for the people on site and around the world who were, underwhelmed by what CrossFit had done on Friday morning with their tribute. After the service at the lake, I went to Luca's hotel, and I sat and spoke with him and Anya before going to the airport to leave Texas. And he showed me on his phone what you saw on Instagram 6 weeks later. He'd already written the majority of that down. It was not something that was crafted and constructed and a clever manipulation of what happened. He'd already written it. The only thing, I was with him when that was posted. I was sitting in a park in Novi Sad on a bench. It was him and me. That was kind of, I don't want to say random, but it was not planned.
Yeah.
He picked me up at the train station that day. I only spent about 30 hours with him total in Novi Sad, maybe something like that. And he, as soon as I got in the car, he said, hey, I'm planning on posting this today. And he showed it to me. So I read it again. The part where he talks about his experience in event 1 was new. I had not read that before. And when I read the words, and that was the last time I saw him, I mean, that was like getting stabbed in the heart. Like, that was brutal. Everything after that in there was extremely consistent with what he had showed me on Sunday over a month previously.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the people who have been critical of him for that, they don't have the same information that I have had. They didn't have the opportunity to talk to him on Friday and Sunday. They didn't have the chance to go to Serbia and spend time with him and get that intimate perspective for the same reasons that CrossFit hasn't said much publicly yet, which is per legal advice and counsel. I'm sure that's going on with Luca and his family, is that they're trying to understand legally what's the best course of action here. It's very complicated. What was your question? I forget the question.
You actually have more insight on what the actual cause of death was, or why he drowned. I mean, he was drowning, but why that happened.
From a biological perspective, I don't have any more information than what's out there and available publicly. What I saw, what I have seen since, what I've seen prior is that, as I mentioned a while ago, the athletes will push themselves to the absolute limit, to the point where they're doing things and they're not even aware that they're doing it. We just happen to have specific examples of Lazar himself doing that.
Yeah.
I was at the top of the Burj Khalifa, and he told us, I don't remember the last 30 or 40 flights of stairs. I blacked out.
Yeah.
But I kept going. Imagine being 30 plus minutes into an event where you're wearing a weight vest, where you're climbing stairs, where there's no air conditioning, and you're blacking out and you're still climbing the stairs on hands and knees without any memory of it. There's a reason that these guys are the best in the world. It's because whether it's in the gym or in the competition, they just have this superhuman ability to go to, we can understand the concept of a dark place.
Yeah.
Take it another level. Add another factor of 10 to that, and that's what these guys and girls are capable of doing somehow. And like I said, if that happens on dry land,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to deal with than if it happens in water. But
Totally.
But 18 years into the CrossFit Games, there's been a water event for 14 of the last 15 years, and and that Games team is primarily the same team that's always been there. How are you not prepared for that?
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time before it happens. You have to take the extra precautionary steps, not not less. And they took less. And Lazar paid for it with his life. And up to this point, they haven't paid for it. And I think that's what's so upsetting the people.
Yeah.
Certainly what's upsetting to me.
Totally agree.
One thing what was really scary for me too was when I think it was Chris Hinshaw who talked about that Jeff Adler also struggled a lot in the water in this event, and also had I don't know if this is like the correct information, but like blacked out. But he was lucky that he was able to put himself back on track and eventually finished the event. But it was just scary to know that Lazar was not the only one who was struggling.
Totally.
That event, it was multiple.
And there were dozens.
Yeah.
I would say at least a dozen athletes that I have personally heard from that had a similar experience, that changed their mentality in the middle of the water there to, this isn't a race anymore. I'm just trying to survive.
Survival mode, yeah.
And I wish, and I honestly would encourage the athletes who've shared these things privately to share them publicly, so that more people can understand that it was a very scary experience for them. And that from the things that I've heard and understand, we're lucky it was only one person that died that day.
Yeah, this is what I thought. And I really appreciate what Pat Wellner said, I think next day or on Saturday or Sunday, and at one, I don't know which channel it was on YouTube, but it was saying something like, I mean, that's the CrossFit Games. It's not war, it's a competition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, that's just...
It's not about life and death.
It's not about life and death. Yeah. It should not be. Yeah.
Totally. I want to say a big thank you for opening up like this. I mean, we met an hour ago and I could see that it wasn't easy for you to talk about that. Really big thank you for giving everybody the information that you have and you could provide like right now.
Because I want to add on, because I talked to very briefly, but to Kristina Vasic last weekend at the Austrian Throwdown. She competed there, and she's a Serbian athlete at semifinals, I think, level, or she's really good and really a kind person. I met her first time. I competed in Belgrade at Fort Fight competition, one of the coolest competitions I've ever been. And I was just briefly asking her, how are you doing? Like, what's going on in your mind? And she knew what I wanted to ask, like what's going on in Serbia. And she was really like very, kind of a sad state of mind and like heavy. It was, you could have, I could have tell that she's like still struggling a bit, and she was just saying, we still all struggle. It's heavy. It's just the CrossFit community in Serbia is still very shocked. And what I want to say is it's not only in Serbia, but I think it's in Europe.
I think the whole community is still
the whole community in Europe is still in shock. And I think that's also, I guess it's quite different to the US community. And I think there are very different perceptions, like the European community and the CrossFit community and people in the US. I mean, then it's the nature of things. Like, we were closer, of course, to our European athletes. It's still difficult.
Totally.
We haven't forgotten it, and we won't forget it.
Brian, Shireen, we've talked quite a lot about the past, what happened in the past. Now let's take a look into the future of CrossFit, the sport that we loved or still love. I don't know. We will see. What are both of your takes? What does the future of CrossFit look like?
You look at me. Big question, right?
Big question.
I don't know.
But two very smart people, and who could tell it better than you guys?
We were talking about this a little earlier today, and we've talked about it already on this show, while I do think that the things are very closely related. They're also very different, the sport and the methodology or the lifestyle. I mentioned that CrossFit as a concept has changed my life in extremely profound ways. And I always remind people when I get a chance to do seminars or introduce them to the fact that if you walk into a CrossFit gym where the owner and the coaches are generally practicing the disciplines that Greg Glassman introduced us all to, it's not just that you're going to become stronger, faster, fitter, more capable of doing cool gymnastics movements. You're probably going to see improvements across the board in your life, in your relationships, in your health markers, in your financial life. You know, it's just a practice. Practicing this lifestyle will improve your life. Mm-hmm. I've seen this more times than I could count. I've heard more stories about this, and it's sometimes in ways that I never would have even imagined. It's not just a random thing, the magic of CrossFit. That's something that exists. We've seen it, and we know hundreds and thousands of people who've experienced it. I don't want that to go away by any means. The sport, it's an interesting word, and it's a word that we've used, but as far as I can understand, the CrossFit Games season is appropriately named. It's much more like a game than a sport. And I've heard people use the word, compare it to the Hunger Games even. Not because of the fact that someone died doing it, but because of the fact that there's a person who's in charge of it, or a group of people who are in charge of it, who are constantly changing the rules as we go. And at a more bigger picture level, the unpredictability and inconsistency of the season is frustrating to a lot of people. I think the reason that regionals were so popular is because it was consistent for the longest period of time. And it also allowed for a big population of people to pursue something that felt like it was within reach. From my perspective, as an analyst, a commentator, a writer, a podcaster, someone who tries to represent how impressive the physical feats of fitness are through competition, the consistency, not just of the regional part of the evolution of the sport, but the consistency of having a majority, if not all of the people who are competitive in the sport doing the same thing is very valuable.
Yeah.
You can say the fittest woman in Austria in the Masters division, and we understand that means something. Mm-hmm. I could tell you that there's a person who was 600, then 400, then 100, then 50th in Europe in quarterfinals, and that means something to you. I could tell you that, okay, maybe you haven't seen this person in the top 10 of a major competition, but they've been 32nd and 26th the last 2 years at the European semifinal. That means something to you.
True.
I think we're about to lose that. I don't foresee the 2025 season being much different than what happened at the 2024 CrossFit Games. I'm not saying that James Sprague didn't win the games. I'm not saying that Emily Rolfe didn't finish third. I feel very confident that they're not the first and third fittest person on earth, respectively, because they didn't actually compete against the people that I would say are in that category. And nobody, and even they, if they were being honest themselves, would say, yeah, I mean, Jeff and Laura, just alone, the defending champions chose not to participate, not because they were injured or sick, but because they in the moment, that weekend, they didn't feel right about participating in what was happening, the same way that I didn't. I've spoken to a lot of athletes who are at the games or have been at the games previously, a lot of multiple year semifinal athletes, and most of them are, I don't say most of them, there's a big percentage of them that are confused about what the right thing to do is in the next season. What I'm projecting is that there's a majority of athletes, let's just call them the top 200 males and females in the world, that are going to compete in the CrossFit Games season because it's what they do. And that they've already had to deal with the wild inconsistencies, the frustrations and whatever, and they've just adapted this mentality that this is what I do, and it's not maybe the way that I wish that it was. It hasn't been the way that I wish that it was, but I just do it. and I adapt to the circumstances and try to find my way. But there will definitely be athletes in that group of people, top 200, and some of them who are in the top 10, and some who are in the top 50, and some of them will have a half dozen games appearances or more that won't participate this year. So what are they going to do? Well, some of them might go and say, okay, I'm doing Wadapalooza in January. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Rogue. Rogue has their own qualifiers, and so far it's only predicated on the CrossFit Games and Rogue. So let's just say, for example, there's only been 2 female champions in the history of Rogue Invitational. What if Laura Horvath doesn't do the games for the next 2 years? How is Rogue going to handle that? Are they not going to invite her to the Rogue Invitational? Eventually, she's not going to have enough points. But she's going to be, if she wants to, one of the fittest women on earth for the next 7 years. So I'm not sure where Rogue's going to factor in, because outside of the CrossFit Games, that's the second biggest earning potential for athletes right now. And even with at least year 1 of the World Fitness Project, which is another huge question mark that people don't know about, Rogue's likely still going to be the second biggest earning potential. Well, they do Dubai. Dubai is it's a bit controversial itself. So there used to be a lot more high-level athletes participating in it than there are now. But there's still big prize money there. I think after taxes, it's right on par with Wadapalooza in terms of the third most earning opportunity. The weird thing is, if you're looking at it from the money side of things, it's not just that the CrossFit Games is the best earning opportunity for every placement 1 through 40. There's also a bunch of sponsorship deals that are tied specifically to the CrossFit Games season. Not tied maybe for a couple athletes, but they're not tied to the Rogue Invitational in Dubai and Wadapalooza or any other competition the way that they are to the games. But just like we're asking the question of, are the games athletes actually going to participate in this, even though none of their demands were met, which maybe we'll talk about that too, are the sponsors going to want to be a part of this? I mean, is it really a good look to put forth a prize purse or put your name associated with the CrossFit Games the way that it was a decade ago, 5 years ago, last year?
Yeah.
And if those contracts, start to, who's the most well-represented apparel sponsor at the games? It's Tier.
Yep.
Shoes and apparel. Well, they're invested in Wadapalooza. Wadapalooza now has 2 events. It's a lot of opportunity. You're about to see, if you're already seeing, that there's a huge contingency of those top 50, 100 names in the world that are going to be competing in South Beach in a couple weeks. Is Tier going to want to be involved with the games? Are they going to restructure their contract so that it's more advantageous for athletes to compete at Rogue or compete at Wadapalooza than it is to compete at the games? That's a significant factor, because what Carolyn Lambre said on Talking Elite Fitness is absolutely relevant. This is their job. They're making decisions with the bank account in mind, just like CrossFit is.
Totally.
People have to live. They have to feed themselves. And if you happen to be the best in the world at something and you're not considering the financial implications of it, it's an irresponsible thing to do. It doesn't mean you're going to compromise on your values, but you have to consider both. Mm-hmm. And the general sentiment that's been expressed that I think almost everyone agrees upon is, whatever each individual athlete decides to do, you have to respect it.
Yeah.
Some of them will say, no, these are my moral values, and I'm not going to compromise that on money. But imagine being Roman Krenikov, who is, from his, think about his life and all that it took for him to get here and get that opportunity and bring his family here. And most of us will not have any idea of the hardships of living in Siberia. He has to consider the financial aspects. His timeline as an athlete is limited.
Yeah.
And what is the future for Roman Krenikov look like after he competes as an athlete? That's just one example. Quite frankly, Lazar and Luca, they come from a similarly challenging economic situation. So there's so many variables for the athletes to consider. There's a ton of variables for the sponsors to consider. And there's also huge implications on what the community decides to do. Because one of the few things that we know about the game season next year is that apparently, somehow, the open registration is also going to impact the CrossFit Games prize purse.
Yes.
And nobody knows exactly what that means. Are they going to take 1% or 100% or somewhere in between and contribute it to the prize purse? But it's millions of dollars that come in on a regular basis through the open. Everyone that I've spoken to is projecting a drop-off in open participation at a minimum of 10% and upwards of 40%. It's a big range. But what is a common thing to say? You vote with your dollar when it comes to that. is there going to be an alternative option for people like you and me to participate in where we can have a meaningful competitive experience on a global scale? This year, I don't think so.
Okay.
But in the future, maybe there will be.
Brian, I went on befriendedfitness.com and I went to the, I think it's About Us section, and I found Brian, founder. Following his collegiate soccer days, friends introduced Brian to CrossFit in the fall of 2013. It filled a void in his life and quickly became a mainstay for him. He signed up for the Open that year and has done every one since. Brian, if we travel into the future, will we find your name on the CrossFit Open leaderboard in 2025?
As of this recording, I'm not planning on signing up for it. I'm also not planning on doing the judges course, which I've done every year since probably 2015, 16. Maybe I missed one. But, you know, I don't feel like contributing financial support to the way that that company is operating now.
Yeah.
But it's a gray area because I love the training.
Yeah.
I love the community. When I go home next week after being on the road for most of this fall, there's an awesome affiliate community there that's run by two incredible people, a husband and a wife, and I like going to the classes. If I pay the membership to go to that gym, or if I coach at the gym, is that any different than signing up for the Open in terms of voting with my dollar, as you say? It's not black and white.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. And I posed a question to people a few months ago of, you know, where is the line for you?
Yeah.
And some people might say there is no line.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to follow CrossFit to the end of the earth no matter what. There's other people that say, I can't support anything that has the word CrossFit associated with affiliate, level 1, games, a semifinal, sanctional, whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm not going to watch any of that CrossFit license event. I'm not interested. We know there's polar extremes on any conversation. But for 80% of the people in the middle that are feeling conflicted about this and unsure of what to do, it's a very personal thing. And I encourage people then, and I'll encourage people now, like, talk to your people.
Yeah.
Talk to the owner of your affiliate. Talk to your training partners. Talk to your husband or wife. Talk to your coach. Do your best to get intimate with yourself about how do I continue to apply the valuable parts of what CrossFit has brought to my life if I'm not comfortable with the way that the company is operating currently.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one answer fits all.
No, of course. Shireen, what's your take on that? Are we going to see your name on the 2025 Open leaderboard?
I don't know yet, but I will say that, so I will be in Australia when the CrossFit Open, like the Open 2025 will kick off. And I plan to basically go with the flow, maybe a little bit like pause and from competing. And so probably not, but I will make the ultimate decision when it's like right around the corner. I'm a little bit like similar to Brian. So my motivation to participate in the CrossFit Games season structure this year or next year is just very low.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You were just looking at it. The new 2025 Games season, like season format. What do you guys think about that?
You know, it's interesting to me because that's the most amount of time I've actually spent looking at the season format. Yeah, because I'm on the road.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working at a different competition almost every week.
Yeah.
And while most of the North American media, and I would even say that probably the international media, they have a select number of competitions that they're really covering throughout the year. So, you know, during the dead time between the Rogue Invitational and, I mean, some of those companies don't even really care about Dubai Fitness Championship, which is mind-blowing to me when you're talking about having 60 elite level athletes from 24 different countries, 6 different continents that are coming to a place to compete for one of the top 3 or 4 prize purses available in the year, and you're not interested in it?
Yeah.
Are you really a fan of this thing? You know? I am so heavily invested in trying to do the best that I can by each of the competitions that I work at that I don't, you know, we'll talk about those things kind of as they come up, but we usually are a little bit slower and wait until we're not working every week on different competitions to dive into that a little bit more. But as I look at this, I just think about one of the things that I think has been to the detriment of the CrossFit Games teams over the years. And I can understand this from Dave's perspective as a programmer, but as the director of the games who's involved in trying to create the best competition in totality, he has more or less chosen to ignore, and therefore his team has ignored, maybe that's not the right word, but been not as interested or invested in the way that the sport has developed outside of the game season as someone like me has. And I think that's, not taking every opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes. They also this is actually pretty good, I would say, for them in terms of making announcements when it comes to the timeline of things relatively early.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why they've done a good job with that this year compared to previous years is because they don't have to find physical locations and dates for semifinals because they're an affiliate. But a lot of the times what happens, and I don't know if CrossFit as a company or the games team is aware of it or not, is that competitions in the US and internationally that have been running for a long period of time are very forward thinking about those things. They regularly communicate 9 to 12 months ahead of time, a lot of information about their competitions, and they have to kind of make educated guesses based on the inconsistent history of the game season about when they can operate and not have a big part of their community not engage, whether it's a qualifier or a live final, because of what the game season will tell them after the fact. Venues are difficult to procure.
Totally, yeah.
So, the one thing that I would say that's positive about this is it's known earlier. Like, you can see all the in-affiliate dates there. The weird one is, of course, the in-person qualifying events from April to June.
Yeah.
Because that's a big span. We don't know how many of those they're going to be. We don't know where they're going to be. We don't know the rules surrounding those. There are a lot of competitions that I'm already aware of that exist in April to June. I don't know if those are part of the CrossFit Games season or not. I don't know how they'll be affected if they're not by the ones that end up being there. I don't know who's getting the opportunity to be those. I don't know if the people who are offered those opportunities will take them. It's just a huge variable that's taking up potentially 3 months. At least with semifinals, we knew that it was going to be 3 weeks. 3 months, April, May, June. Is that like last week of April, the first week of June? So it's only 5 weeks. Is it from first week of April to last week of June? That's potentially 12 or 13 weeks. So there's some good and some bad just from how the CrossFit Games season affects the other global competitive community and those competitions. But yeah, that's the most amount of time I've spent looking at it.
Okay.
But I will add this. Just generally spoken, what's annoying about this is like the inconsistency again. Again, changing things up. And I think lots of athletes think that way. Like, again, there are so many changes. And also like the in-affiliates, semifinals, I think it's also very controversial about,
You could tell me this. My perspective last year was that, especially for the age group athletes, they liked the fact that the quarterfinals for age group was the same as the open divisions.
Yeah, I think that was a positive.
Yeah, there are definitely athletes who are good enough to do both, especially when it's just if it's the top 1%.
True. Yeah.
And here, if you're just looking at that stage of the season, and you are, I'm not sure what the rules will be surrounding teams relative to individuals, but if you're an age group athlete who can make the semifinal and the individual open division, you have a semifinal potentially the first weekend of April and also the first weekend of May. If you're going to also do the teams, that's the last weekend of April. And I don't think that the high-level athletes are that excited about doing online semifinals to begin with.
Yeah.
And then to potentially have to do it 3 times.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a conversation to be had about, is it a positive thing to be an in-affiliate semifinal or not? I mean, there's people like Ariel Lowen that's pretty vocal about that. And it's not just that she trains in her garage and why can't I just do the workouts in my garage? Forever, one of the cool things about the Open is that you could do it anywhere. I remember 10 years ago watching someone who was living in like Kyrgyzstan and got stones and a bamboo stick and made a barbell out of that to do thrusters with.
Yeah. I also want to add, like, I totally agree about like the cool thing that you can do workouts in your affiliate or in your garage even. But that's the unique thing about the open, right? And that's the cool thing, that you can do the workouts in your community, in your gym. But I think it's very different, like it's the quarterfinals as well. Like that was okay, just doing it in an affiliate, but semifinals levels, what's the goal of a semifinal? Bringing the best athlete to the CrossFit Games, right?
Sure.
It's just very different than the Open, or supposed to be, right? So I'm not a fan of.
No, there's a lot of other variables.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
One of the variables is if you have semifinal level athletes in your area who are not part of your affiliate, they don't really feel that great about going there and interrupting the flow of the affiliate for a community that they're not a part of. Secondly, you can just look at, Brent Fikowski is the classic example of this. He was a threat to win or podium at regionals and semifinals for a decade. The year that there were online semifinals, everyone was like, oh my God, are we going to not have Brent Fikowski at the games? Yeah. Because it's a lot harder for him to perform in an online setting where there's a much more limited scope of what can be tested. The other absolutely critical factor that has to be mentioned with this is that we've had 4 years of quarterfinals, and the CrossFit Games team has failed to administer a fair and equitable test at any stage during those 4 years. In fact, they've barely learned from their mistakes year after year, and they've been their responses have directly denied their own shortcomings in the years, and I have personally experienced that. So there's a lot of red flags when it comes to the online semifinal that could potentially be an additional deterrent from some of the high-level athletes wanting to participate in this, especially if they think that they can make 2 of the 3 between Wadapalooza, Dubai, and the Rogue Invitational, especially if they get an invite to be a part of the World Fitness Project. I'm personally working with Reps Ahead to offer some athletes some unique earning potential. There's a lot of other competitions that exist that have, it might not be $50,000, $100,000, $300,000 prize purses, but Luka Dukic is a great example. 2 years ago, in 2023, when he was sick and couldn't compete at semifinals, he competed a dozen times that year, and his total earnings over the course of his off-season events was on par with his brother, who finished in the top 10 at the games. So there are other ways to compete in this sport and to make a living. And again, I'm going to throw it out to the sponsors. Like, I think Adrian Moonweiler is a great example. He's had a contract with Nike that rewards him financially for finishing on the podiums at CrossFit licensed events. So he stopped competing in the game season because taking podium at CrossFit licensed events at competitions throughout Europe provided him a chance to far exceed his potential of earnings during the games season. In 2021, Alexander Caron got 26th in the world, and his total earnings over 4 stages of competition was negative $800. They've improved since then. Yeah. But at that time, if you're Adrian Muller and you're saying, why would I even... The semifinals in Europe and North America are on par with Wadapalooza and Dubai in terms of difficulty to win, podium, take a top 5 or a top 10 at. But the payouts in the best case years, the first place was $10,000. And you have to pay taxes on that in the U.S. You can go to Dubai and win $50,000 if you're good enough to win a semifinal. In North America, you're good enough to win Dubai, and you have no taxes on that. Yeah. It's 6 times the earning potential and the same difficulty of competition. So these are all variables that athletes and their coaches will be considering. And I'm not really sure what each individual decision will end up being.
I guess we will see. And I am very, very sorry, but we have to wrap it up because my cameras are dying. My batteries are dying. I would love to, what I always do in my podcast is I make a quick CrossFit profile of the guests I have. It's just like A-B questions. I think it's 10 in a row. Don't think about them too much. Just answer intuitively, if that's okay for you. We're going to...
Rapid fire.
Yes, rapid fire. And Shireen, you're going to answer first, but it's going to be the same question and then the second question. Okay? All right, there we go. Shireen, EMOM, MREP, or 4-time?
EMOM.
EMOM.
Shireen, what's your most important CrossFit accessory, as in like weightlifting belt, grips?
So you know what it is.
Really?
Yeah.
And knee sleeves.
Knee sleeves?
Thumb tape.
Thumb tape? All right.
Unless gymnastics strips, Scott, then gymnastics strips.
That's
Okay.
hard for it. Yeah.
Shireen, when you hear that song and when it plays that kind of music, you perform 10% better.
Which kind of music? That's easy. Techno.
Techno?
Kenny Chesney, get along.
Okay. Shireen, if there would be one movement in CrossFit that you can delete out of everybody's head, no one would remember it ever again, which one would it be?
Just thinking too much.
Yeah, way too much.
Too much. Shuttle runs.
Shuttle runs.
Yeah.
Kipping handstand push-up.
Kipping handstand push-ups. Okay. Reebok, Noble, or Go Rock?
For what? As a just noble.
Say Reebok. That was the classic era of the game.
Classic Reeboks. Team or indie?
Team.
Watch indie, compete team.
All right. Gymnastics or weightlifting?
Gymnastics.
Weightlifting.
Really? What's your 1 RM back squat?
I think 120
Kilos.
kilos.
In kilos?
No, you can do it in pounds. I'll convert it afterwards.
It's embarrassing. 285 pounds.
Okay, no idea what it is.
Yeah. No idea either.
It's not that much more than a shirt sheet.
Never use chalk again or never use tape again?
Never use tape again.
I believe.
Probably would say the same, even though I said, yeah, I mean, I don't have to travel with chalk because it just is there, but
True.
good ones.
Okay. Oh my God, that was almost 2 hours and time flew by. I don't know. I usually prepare an outro. Of course, I haven't for this one because it was kind of short notice. I just want to say thank you guys. I mean, it was so valuable what both of you told me. Thank you for taking the time.
And we will see each other at Waterpalooza.
We will.
Looking
Yes.
forward to competing and commentating.
Are you going to have her on the live stream?
I don't think so.
We will live stream every division.
But there's
But there will
So
be
mom can watch.
your mom can watch.
So there's going to be no commentary.
What we would call light coverage with audio from the MSC for all of the divisions other than the LATAM Cup and the elite individual teams. Those will have a full broadcast production.
Okay.
And reps ahead.
And reps ahead.
And reps ahead, yeah.
Is there any last thing you want to plug? You want to tell the CrossFit community? I hope that the cameras are still working. This one's still running. Anything I missed?
No, it was great. Appreciate the opportunity to have those conversations. Very professional. So, yeah. Thank you guys. Hopefully found it valuable.
100%.
Thanks for having us.
I say thank you. Thank you very, very much, guys. And thank you to everybody who is watching or listening at home or in the car or wherever you may be. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate a rating on Spotify or a like on YouTube. And whilst you're on YouTube, you can subscribe as well. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hopefully see you again in 2 weeks' time. Take care, guys. Bye.